Week 17 of the fantasy football season. He hits tight end start sits every matchup. This week, Dallas Cowboys at Titans Thursday Night Football. There's Dalton Schultz. He's been a much better tight end this season with Dak Prescott at quarterback. I know the last few weeks the numbers haven't really been there for Schultz, but this week versus a mediocre Titan defense against tight ends on the season, I think Schultz could put in the top 10 performance at the tight end position. This Cowboy team, we know they've been throwing the football a lot over the last few weeks, and with possibly Tony Pollard out as well, I think we see Schultz more involved a little bit, and I give him the start. Now to Austin Hooper and Chizozam Okonkwo, they're both sits for me. Malik Willis is the starting quarterback for this Tennessee Titan team, and he's not really a guy that throws the football. You don't really get many people involved here, and this Cowboy defense is pretty decent to start with, even though I know over the last 2 weeks here, they've been getting passed on a decent amount, but this week I don't see Willis doing much. I don't see the tight ends doing much, and they're both sits for me in this one. Now to the Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens. Pat Freiermuth, believe it or not, he's been a top 7 tight end in fantasy points this season here. Pat Freiermuth, he's been a favorite of Kenny Pickett over the last few weeks here. I know he had the goose egg a few weeks ago, but that's what Mitchell Trubisky at quarterback. So this week here, I'll give him the start, is Pat Freiermuth. He's a tight end that could go make plays. He's a security blanket for the Steelers team. And he's obviously familiar with this Raven team, being in the division over the last couple seasons. He's a start for me. Now to Mark Andrews. The numbers have been down over the last month of the season. Injury has definitely hurt him. He hasn't been 100%. But also with Lamar Jackson not in the starting lineup here, it's hurt Mark Andrews as well. So if Lamar somehow could suit up in this ball game, even though he's been out for multiple weeks now with the knee injury, I think Andrews could get back on track a little bit. And let's face it, if you made it this far in your fantasy football season, you're not benching Andrews, so he's a start for me. Now to the Saints at the Philadelphia Eagles. Taysom Hill, he's a start for me in this one. We know he's just pretty much running the football read play option for the most part. But hey, in ESPN and Yahoo Sports League, he qualifies at the tight end position. So why not would he take advantage of that? Or at least try to. So this week here, Taysom Hill, he gets a start for me. I know I haven't listed him much this season at the spot, but over the last few weeks, the workload's gone up, and it's about time New Orleans has finally used him a little bit more. I don't know why they shied away from him with Taysom Hill, and now when it's too late in the season, they went back to him, but he's a start for me. And Jawan Johnson, he's been a hit-or-miss tight end. He's pretty much been a touchdown-dependent tight end. So if he's not finding the end zone, he's not finding fantasy points. And this week here in a big matchup, obviously, for most owners in a championship, I'm not going to count on a potential touchdown or not to possibly make or break my season. So right here, he's a sit for me. And now to Dallas Goedert, top 5 tight end easily this season. Even with Jalen Hurts not in the lineup, let's say, once again this week, I think Goddard puts in a good game. The Saint linebacker crew not that great against the pass and tight ends. And Dallas Goedert, like I said, he's one of the best tight ends in the league. He's a matchup nightmare, and he's a start for me. Now to the Bears at the Lions. Cole Kmet, he's a sit for me. I know he had a couple pop games early in the season. I know he had 23 fantasy points early in the season versus the same Lion defense. But over the last few weeks where he really hasn't done anything, and it's a road game for the Bears, I got Kmet as a sit. Now to the Lions side of things, Brock Wright and Shane Gilstra, both benches for me in this one. I know Wright 2 weeks ago had the game-winning touchdown, 50 yards, versus the New York Jets. And I know Zoltra last week, 3 touchdowns, but it's a fluky thing. These guys were all pretty much backup tight ends trying to see who could be a starter, with obviously TJ Hawkinson traded away to the Minnesota Vikings at the NFL trade deadline. But anyway, this week they're both sits for me. Too risky to start them. Already type of game with the championship on the line, or even a third place game where you're trying to just place third in your fantasy league. So this week, all these tight ends are sits. Now to the Panthers at the Buccaneers here. Tommy Tremble, he hasn't done anything this season for the most part for this Panther team, besides a couple games finding the end zone. And this week here, it's a pretty tough matchup, believe it or not, versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This Buc team, they did a good job last week for the most part at Arizona. I know Hopkins didn't do much. We know Trey McBride didn't do much in that ball game. And this week, I don't see this Panther offense really doing much as well, where I don't really like a lot of guys on this offense. So Trimble is a sit. And now the K-Dot, and he's a sit for me as well. Tight end, I know, is a weak position But Cade Otton's a guy you've been waiting on a lot this season. And for the most part, he really hasn't delivered for fantasy owners. So this week, I know it's versus a mediocre Carolina Panther defense, but tight end, I know hasn't been the great position, but there's still guys who's steady. There's still a guy that's been putting up points. And Cade Otton's not a guy you can count on, so he's a sit for me. Now to the Broncos at the Kansas City Chiefs. Greg Dulcich's a start. It seems like he's one of the main targets in this offense, obviously, behind Jerry Jeudy. New coaching staff over there now for this Bronco team with a couple weeks left, with Nathaniel Hackett finally fired and not the head coach here. And Greg Dulcich's a playmaker. He's a rookie, and he's been impressive for the most part of that. And in a game where they're chasing points, he's a nice start this week. Now to the Chiefs. What am I going to say? Travis Kelce for probably the 5th year in a row now. The top tight end in all fantasy football. And to close out the fantasy football season here, I think he puts on a huge performance once again versus the Denver Broncos, where we see 25-30 fantasy points. And you must start him this week. And he's a guy who's on a lot of championship teams, is Travis Kelce. No doubt about it. Now to the Colts at the Giants. It's been a carousel of tight ends the whole season for this Colt team. And out of the 3 guys, I don't still trust any of them. So Jelani Woods, he's had a couple pop games this year. Kylan Grayson, a couple pop games. But they just all couldn't put it all together where they're hitting on the same page. So they both sit for me in this one. This Giant defense, pretty stout for the most part, believe it or not. Even though I know last week Hawkinson did them at the tight end position. But these guys aren't in the league as a Hawkinson, and they don't have the quarterback where we could get the ball to him like a Hawkinson, so they're sitting out there. We know he got off to a good start early in the season for this New York Giant team, but over the last few weeks since he returned, the numbers really haven't been there for Bellinger. So this week here versus the Indianapolis Colts, he's going to be a sit for me and not a guy you could count on. Now to the Jaguars at the Houston Texans. Evan Ingram, he's a must-start tight end. And it's only been over the last 3-4 weeks of the season here where he's emerged onto the scene and he's put up huge fantasy numbers here as Evan Ingram. So this week here versus a pretty weak Houston Texan defense versus tight ends, he's a must-start this week. Now to Jordan Akins. I know he's had a good games over the last couple weeks here where he's been serviceable, but he's not putting up fantasy numbers like you're going to want each week, even though we know tight end is a weak position. And I know I recommended Akins as a pickup multiple times over the last few weeks here. This week versus Jacksonville, he could be a guy on your roster, but obviously you're not going to start him. Now to the Cardinals at the Falcons. Not much to say in this one. Trey McBride, one of the top tight ends in college football last season, but this year he had since filling in for Zach Ertz last 5-6 weeks now. He really hasn't done anything. It's not totally his fault they don't have a quarterback right now. Going with McCoy and Sorcery over there for this Arizona Cardinal team, and Trey McBride just really hasn't done anything. So he's a sit. Out to McCole Pruitt, he's a sit for me as well. This Falcon team don't really have playmakers besides Algie and London, but hey, that's a start with 2 young rookies, obviously, and now penciling out the rest of the team. I know they got Kyle Pitts as well, but he's been out for the season since week 12, week 13 with injury. And Pruitt, I know he's had a couple games finding the end zone, but can you really count on him in this one doing enough to be a fantasy option? So he's a sit for me this week. Now to the Browns at the Commanders. David Njoku, I know the numbers have been Jekyll and Hyde. I know him and Deshaun Watson don't really have chemistry, but this week here, I got a feeling that the Commanders, Njoku bounces back with a good ball game, and he puts those things behind him, and I got him as a start, stretch the field, and he's one of the better tight ends, believe it or not, this season in fantasy. I was down on him as well, but the numbers don't lie, and he's been putting up numbers. Now to Logan Thomas, he's been injured over the last few seasons here, and this season he tried to get his footing under him, but he's not really a guy doing much here as Logan Thomas. So this week he's a sit. He hasn't really had many games this season as well, and he's not a guy you could trust. Now to the Dolphins at the New England Patriots. Both tight ends you can't trust. Mike Gesicki was way better last season than he is this year. He's more of a blocker now. He's more of a limited route runner as well. And this week in a tough matchup at the Patriots, you're not going to trust him anyway. He's a sit. Now to Hunter Henry, he's pretty much a guy that had a couple decent games, and then New England, they just couldn't start winning games once again, and no one for the most part's done nothing for them on offense. Hunter Henry, big free agent signing a few years ago from the Chargers. He really hasn't done much. Now to the New York Jets at the Seattle Seahawks. Tyler Conklin, we know he's had a couple good games on and off this season, but the last few weeks we haven't seen it for him. And you're not going to really have confidence going out there and put him in your lineup. So right now, He's a sit for me. And now to Noah Fant, he's had a couple decent games on and off over the last few weeks. We know Tyler Lockett might not play in this game. And we know Noah Fant could go out there and at least make a few plays at the tight end position here. So Fant's a borderline option. This Jet defense is good. One of the better units in the year on defense. But he's a guy that's a borderline option. I think he could get 10, 11 fantasy points in this one with the defense roll to DK Metcalf. And like I said, he's still a youngster as well as Fant. So he's a start for me. Now to Niners at the Vegas Raiders. George Kittle, he's been a man on a mission over the last couple weeks here with 4 touchdowns. And this week here at the Vegas Raiders, I don't see him pumping off the gas. Is George Kittle. So I think he has another big game. I don't think it's going to be 35-plus points in this one, but he's definitely a tight end to start this week. Now to the Raiders side of things, Darren Waller, he's come back over the last few weeks, and he's looked pretty good. So this week here, I think he could go out there and have a decent game, even though I know this Niners team's going to harass Derek Carr in this offense. But anyway, Waller is a start, and he's a safe security blanket. Now to the Minnesota Vikings at the Packers. TJ Hawkinson's a start. Last week going over 35 fantasy points. And that's just the playmaker ability, obviously, of TJ Hawkinson. We saw with the Lions some big ball games, and then some games where he's mediocre. But when it's all said and done in the regular season here, he's going to finish in the top 5 at the tight end position in fantasy points. Now to the Packers, Robert Tonyan. A couple years ago, nice security blanket, one of the main targets in this offense. But the Packers have shied away from him, and he's not a tight end with any value this season. He's done nothing, so he's a sit. Now to the Rams at the Chargers battle of Los Angeles. Tyler Higbee coming off the best game of his career in this week's ball game. So right here, side of things here, I got Gerald Everett as a borderline option. He's coming off a goose egg, but there's also ball games where he's had solid games. Is Gerald Everett. But this week here versus a middle of the pack Ram defense, and with the struggles on and off for Gerald Everett, he's a borderline option at best for me. And now to the final game of the week, Monday Night Football, Buffalo Bills at the Cincinnati Bengals. So Dawson Knox, over the last few weeks, he's really putting in numbers. I know a lot of people gave up on him early in the season. I was one of those guys as well. But now it's coming to bite back a little here with Dawson Knox. And he's a guy Allen's comfortable with in the red zone, obviously. Right here, he's a guy that's a red zone threat. He can make plays, obviously. And to be honest, he's definitely a tight end in the top 10 for the rest of this season, carrying into next season. Now to the Bengals, Mitchell Wilcox. He's filling for Hayden Hurst over the last few weeks. We really haven't seen much impressiveness out of him, so he's a sit. And Hayden Hurst, even if he comes back in this game, T. Higgins has been back over the last few weeks here. He's not doing much. He's Hayden Hurst with targets going to all the wide receivers. And he's not going to be 100% as well in a tough matchup versus Buffalo. So that's tight end start sits every matchup of Week 17 of the fantasy football season.